Welcome to Time to Teach with Tammy, the podcast that gives tips, advice, and suggestions to teachers by a real teacher. So sit back and enjoy. And oh yeah, don't forget to subscribe. We're back. Welcome to Time to Teach, episode 52, entitled A Year is Here. And I'm so excited about today's episode because as the title doesn't actually really indicate, today's episode is celebrating my 1 year anniversary, the 1 year anniversary of Time to Teach. Actually, I do believe that by the time this episode publishes, it might be a couple of weeks after the year mark. But I just didn't really want to move anything else around. I do have the option of actually launching this on the 1 year date, and I might do that as well, but more than likely I won't. So, so today I'm going to be just kind of sharing things that I've learned in this year of podcasting, things as a teacher in this past year, but also things as a podcaster, because it has definitely been a year of growth for me. And I just really want to take this show to really highlight it. I've been playing around with different ideas of how can I celebrate this really big milestone. I feel like it's a huge milestone in the life of a podcaster, getting that 1 year under your belt. Today I will just be kind of celebrating that, my growth. Also talking a little bit about maybe some of the obstacles that I've had as a podcaster, because that has definitely been something that's been on my mind, because I've had ups and downs as a podcaster, and I would like to discuss that on today's episode. So sit back and relax, because that's coming up right after our wins and fails segment, which starts right now. Okay, wins for the week. I think my very big win for the week absolutely has to be that I have completed the writing samples. We do writing samples 3 times a year. I don't know how frequently other schools do it, but I feel like this is probably pretty middle of the ground in terms of how often a school is doing such samples and benchmarks. So 3 times a year for us. We do our first ones in September. Our school year starts like mid-August. So September, beginning of September is our first round of writing samples. And then in January is our second round. And then mid-May is our last round of writing samples. And it's just a nice way to show students growth. Especially for us in our grade level, because there's a ton of growth in pre-first. This is because most of them, they're not really writing when they come in. They obviously have some letter sound and letter knowledge, and they're writing maybe a few words, but their sentences are not really structured. And, they're still working on sentence structure and fluency even by the end of the year, but they've come such a long way. So it's nice to see that. One thing with the writing samples that I've always argued is that you just don't really get their best writing in a writing sample, because it's not the way that we typically function. We do workshops, so they're very used to being able to pace their writing however best suits them. I don't really tell them when to start a new piece, when to end a piece. They're really in charge of making those bigger decisions. they, they go through and they have lots of time to revise and to edit. They can work in partnerships to do that as well. And a writing sample just doesn't really replicate that. It's done in 2 days, and whatever they have in the 2 days, they need to be done. But that is not to mean that I don't find value in the writing sample. I absolutely do. And that has been something that it's taken me only within the last couple of years that I've warmed up more to finding value in it, because I used to just really, I don't know, I guess just because you see your students doing so poorly on them, or not that they do poorly on them, but they just don't produce their best writing. It just really kind of conjured up some negative feelings. But in the last several years, I really have said, you know what, that's fine, because we are not using it for reporting purposes in terms of reporting out to the parents. It's strictly internal, and I'm fine with that. They're not being penalized because of anything that they might not be performing well on, which would be okay if I felt like it replicated the kind of work they did on a daily basis. But it's strictly an on-demand piece, and seeing what can you do in this time frame, and it still is able to show growth, and it still gives us a lot of information. So I'm fine with it now. I don't have those same negative feelings. But anyway, it feels good because I've gotten that finished. We are allowed 2 days on it, and they did it, they're done. But the other thing that actually I'm including in this win is I've actually gone through and scored them. I want to say this is a record for me. I am very much a go-getter. I get stuff done. I am a doer. But I'm also, this is kind of contradictory to what I just said. I can be a procrastinator when it comes to paperwork like things. I just like the scoring of it. Like the formal scoring. I love working with students and looking at what they need to work on. What are they doing really well? What do they need to work on? When it's not like a big, like I have to score out and report and input this into a data sheet. So it actually was like record time, I think, in my lifetime as a teacher, to actually, from the time that I gave the writing samples and then like 2 days later, have them all scored. I have not yet put them into the data sheet, into the spreadsheet, but that's my next step. In fact, I was so impressed with myself, I left them at school. I'm just realizing I could actually brought them here and had that done now and really had a real record. But I was so thinking I was done that I'm like, I don't need to take these home now. I'm just going to leave them at school. But yeah, that was a record time for me, you guys. And the time that I gave those writing samples and had them scored, I impressed myself. That was a huge win, because usually I will give them and I may not look at them again until like, the next week. Because a lot of times I will baby step those things that I don't love. So, so that was a big win for me. Huge win. Okay, fails for the week. I don't really have any fails. I don't know what to say. I've been like racking my brain and like, what didn't work out? Because I'm sure there was something that I experienced. So I don't want to give the impression that, Tammy had a perfect week, everything was great. That's never the case. We always have bumps. The only fail I can say, and this is not school or teacher related, which you guys know I do sometimes, there's something I've been working on, and it's kind of like gotten a little more complicated than I had hoped. That's kind of a fail. Not a fail, it's just like it's going to be more complicated. And I guess it did in some ways kind of like affect me, because I've been like dealing with this thing, and it's just kind of like put me in a very stressful place for the last week or so, which I'm handling it much better now and feeling so much better about it. But I guess it was causing me a lot of stress, which obviously when you're dealing with stress that affects you wherever you go, which is why you need very good stress management and stress techniques. So that was, I guess, kind of a fail. But I mean, having said all of that, actually, that's been affecting me for the last couple of weeks. And this past week, I've finally gotten to like a place where I think I'm managing that much better. So it's not even a fail for this past week. But that's really the only thing that surfaces to my mind. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. I don't know what else to say. So I was kind of racking my brain for like, come on, I got to come up with the fail. And then I thought, well, I don't know. Do I have to force a fail? I mean, maybe if I didn't have this major obvious fail, that's not the worst thing, right? So yeah, so that's it. I mean, that's it. Okay, you guys. So moving on then, let's go ahead and get today's show started. Oh, and actually before we start the show, I want to give a shout out to one of my online PLNs. That would be bookcampPD, hashtag bookcampPD. Shout out to you guys. I don't know, this is one in the chats that I really try to always hit. It's on Saturday morning. Let's see, it's at 8 o'clock Central Time. And I don't always get to it, but it is one that I really try to. So most Saturdays I will get to it. But they were just so sweet. I forget what the question was. There was some question in the group. It might have been about growth or something like that. And I think I had mentioned that like I felt like I had grown as a podcaster in a year. And I was a little hesitant to use that as my answer, but it's something that I feel like I'm coming up on my 1 year anniversary. It's something I've been thinking about a lot. It's very big on my mind, so I threw it out there and didn't even expect, but so many of the members were like, oh, can you share your podcast? And I did. I do not really like to self-promote, and I know a lot of people would say, but you should, because how else do you get the word out? And yes, I do post my podcasts like on my Facebook page, on my Twitter page, but not like over excessively. When a new episode comes out, that's when I post, but I just don't like to shove it down anybody's throats. I think also because I don't like that as a podcast consumer. And the other thing I fear is that I just don't want people to get the wrong idea that I'm, like just trying to get my podcast out there. That's so not me. You guys know, especially if you've been listening to this for a while, I don't make money off of my podcast. That doesn't mean that in the future I won't ever accept like a sponsor to promote something on here. I keep things very open, but that's totally not why I've started my podcast. And I don't think anyone should. If anyone is wanting to make money, don't start a podcast, because you probably won't. It's not a great way to make money. You do have to spend money to have the podcast hosted. So I don't do this for money. I strictly do this because I am super passionate as an educator, and it's just something that I really enjoy, and I think those are the reasons why you should do it. But anyway, I thought it was really sweet. There were several members at bookcampPD who were very interested, wanted to know more about the podcast in terms of where it can be found. And then one of the members, Meredith, who is always there and must be part of having created this Twitter chat. I'm not even sure, but she's always there, so I believe that to be true. Just basically said, that's fine. Feel free to talk about the podcast. We're always want to learn, so please feel free to discuss it here. And I thought that was awfully sweet of them, because I had explained to them that I don't really like to self-promote. So I don't usually go into a chat even talking about my podcast. If something comes up and it's relevant, of course I'm going to mention it because it is a huge part of my life and my learning and my passion, but I don't ever want to be the one who's like shoving it down your throat, because I am not about that. But I just thought it was so sweet of them. So yeah, huge shout out to my PLN hashtag bookcampPD. I love this community. It's a community where we really talk about the books that we're reading, and most of them are educational. I mean, they really are educational. Sometimes other, like, just entertaining books will get brought up as well, but it's basically educational. And they're also on Voxer too. I have not been as active on Voxer lately. That's a fail for me. But yeah, they're great. So if you want to actually check out that community, it's really good, especially if you're a book lover. And I've done an episode before on why you should be reading. And even if you're not an avid reader, even if you're someone who just only reads during vacation, because I think there are some teachers who do that, but you just want to be in that kind of environment, or maybe you want to get inspired and motivated to read more, totally check out that community. Again, it's hashtag bookcampPD. It's only a 30-minute chat, so it's totally doable. And it's been a huge part of me, I feel, getting motivated in my own reading life. So anyway, I wanted to shout out to them, because I thought it was so very sweet of them to be so open to me and what I'm doing. So yeah. So, okay, now we really are getting started with today's episode. So like I said, I'm going to talk about a year of growth. A year is here. So I'm talking about, my growth as a podcaster, as a teacher, and maybe some just personal things as well. We'll see where this takes us. Okay, in terms of, where am I now as opposed to where I was as a podcaster in the beginning, I just remember being somewhat terrified of taking that first leap a year ago. I spent a lot of time thinking about it, months and months of just thinking about, boy, it would be so nice to have my own podcast. I've been such a consumer podcast that this was kind of the genesis of it all. Just, that's all I do is consume podcasts these days. I don't watch TV. I don't do anything. I'm just listening to podcasts. So being someone who's been passionate in education and a blog writer, though not always active on my blog writing, I'm in the middle of writing a post, and I looked and saw that the last time I published was in February, and I know people would argue about the consistency there, but hashtag real life gets in the way. Yeah. So anyway, just having that, it was kind of a natural next step for me. So I'd been thinking about it for a year, and then just one weekend where I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this. I was just listening to all of these podcasts about podcasting. I was taking notes, I was researching online, and I got a little bit terrified because there were, mentions of equipment that I don't know what they were. It was like some names that I'd never heard of. Just trying to make sense of it all was a bit confusing. And then I kind of got to this point where I was like, I'm not going to be able to do this. I don't have that equipment. I don't know how much it costs. I don't even know if it's available here in Mexico, and here geographically where I am in Mexico, which I'm in the second largest city. So I guess if you can find it, you probably can find it here, but still, I just don't know. So I just kind of got to the point where I'm like, I don't think this is going to happen. I really wanted it to happen. It's not. I don't think it can happen. And then, of course, when I made that decision, I started to feel a little sad because, I had kind of like amped everything up in my head that I'm starting this podcast. It's going to happen eventually. So it was kind of disappointing to get to that point. And then the real Tammy came out at that point. You know her. She's the one who will stop at nothing. that's my true self. If there's something that I want, I will figure it out. It really doesn't matter how complex it is, how time consuming. If I decide I really want something, I am going to make it happen. That's really not trying to, toot my own horn. It's just kind of how I am. It's just what I do. So then I decided, well, okay, forgetting all the fancy equipment, what if I just tried to make it work with what I have? And at that point, it was just my laptop, which I haven't moved too much further from that point. So I tried it. I tried recording with just my laptop, and it turned out, okay, I can do this. Internal mic, check. Maybe it's not the best quality, but check. And then I downloaded Audacity, and that seemed to be working. Not super complicated. I watched a couple of YouTube tutorials, and check, I started. Got my first episode out and thought, woohoo, this is actually happening. Figured out I needed cover art, so I got something super, super simple. I use Canva primarily in Pexel.com, Pexel or Pexel, so now I can't remember, something like that to do my artwork. Super simple, because that's also kind of how I am. So yeah, so that's how it all started. And then where have I moved in terms of my equipment? I upgraded to a 500 peso microphone. That only sounds expensive if you don't live in Mexico. If you live in Mexico and you deal with pesos, that's only about, give or take, depending on where the currency is, where that currency exchange is by the day, 25 US dollars. So that's all I've really done in terms of upgrading in terms of equipment. I'm still on the same laptop. I've only upgraded slightly to a microphone. I have gone and inquired about other microphones, almost invested in another one, and then kind of chickened out because I wasn't feeling it. It was kind of ugly. And hey, you don't need a beautiful microphone, but I'm just thinking, if I myself am going to be, doing this every week, I want to not think that my microphone is ugly. So I'm still waiting for the right one. I think I found the one that I will purchase when I eventually purchase it, but I feel like the microphone I want is probably about 1,800, 2,000 pesos. So it's a little over 100 US dollars. Probably not bad. But it is an investment. It's not going to break the bank, but it is an investment. So every time I've had a couple of times where I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this. It's available on Amazon, so I know I can get it. But I've chickened out every time. I don't know. So yeah, that's where I am now. So a year later, I only have an upgraded 500 peso microphone. Not much has changed. Something else that you might have noticed that has changed in a year is I started initially writing much more in-depth show notes, and I don't do that anymore. I still have my show notes, but they're very simple. I even have kind of an outline for it. Like, I know my intro begins at 0.00 minutes. Then I'll put in when my topic, the episode description starts, and then my wins and fails segment, I give a timestamp for that. Then I give a timestamp for when the actual show begins. And this is where I've tapered off. I used to give more specific timestamps on the show itself, but you guys, it just kind of got time consuming, and realize I'm doing this on top of everything, on top of teaching, but then on top of being a mom and a wife, and it's just yeah, it just got to be a little more time consuming. So I kind of thought, well, I don't have to give such in depth. So I just say where the timestamp for when the show starts. And that's primarily if someone says, you know what, I don't want to hear your intro, not interested in your wins and fails for the week. I don't need all that to live a happy life. Just tell me when your show actually starts, when the episode actually starts. So that's why I do the timestamps in my show notes. And then I give and then a timestamp for the outro. So that has changed in a year. I have definitely decreased on the show notes. So that's been a change. Editing has changed. I never did a ton of editing, but in a year's growth, I've done. How could you say a year's growth when you actually minimize in something? But in a year from when I started, I've decreased on my editing. I just try to be a little more efficient, that in the time that I'm recording, if I know like, oh, I just yawned, so instead of going back and deleting that during the playback, just really trying to take out things immediately as they happen to reduce the amount of editing that I have to do. I do have to edit. I do go back and play back what I have, so I can get the timestamps, but what I might not listen thoroughly back to is the actual episode part, just for time purposes. So my editing has gotten a lot more simple, and I know there might be some people who say, well, you're never going to become much of a podcaster at that rate, Tammy. That's fine. I'm not in this to be the best, like the number one podcast show. I'm just simply trying to share what I do, knowing that I'm not the one with all the answers. I can just only add my own perspective. I'm not trying to be a best-selling podcaster. I would like people to enjoy my podcast, but I'm working within the limitations of reality. So it has to be whatever it is, and that's all I can do. I'm doing my best. So yeah, what can I say? So editing is something that has changed within a year. I don't do the same amount of editing that I did in the beginning. Something else that has changed, I've gotten a lot better about this. I've always practiced batching in different periods of podcasting. But then I would have some periods where I wasn't batching, and it would just be, I would need an episode, just do my episode at a week. And I cannot emphasize enough that if you are podcasting, batching is one of the best ways to go. So what I have done, and it works in my my schedule, when I have vacations, those are perfect opportunities to get ahead on a couple of episodes. And that's literally all I mean. I have 2 or 3 episodes that are pre-recorded at a time. And this is very helpful. Why? Because there are going to be weeks where you're like, you know what, I'm sick this week. I don't feel well. I can't really think about my show right now. Like, I just don't have the energy. Or I'm going through a stressful time right now, and I just mentally can't think of my show. Having a couple of pre-recorded episodes have been a lifesaver to me, because it has happened where I've had times where I'm like, I just am not feeling well, whether it is because I'm physically sick or there's just something stressful in my life, and I just can't wrap my head around recording at the time. Having those batch episodes, you guys, have been huge. Okay, huge. So if you are ever contemplating doing your own podcast, I can't stress that enough. Batch a few episodes. I don't mean anything crazy. I don't mean take a day and record all day. You probably will super burn yourself out that way, but I mean, just always have a couple of episodes pre-recorded, ready, maybe not even ready to go. Maybe you still see, I don't do that. I have them pre-recorded, but I still need to go back and timestamp and type up the notes and everything. But I'll just have the recording that I need. That's huge. So yeah, that's something that I had started with, but then I kind of let myself get through times where I'm like, oh, I don't have any pre-recorded shows. And then I would go back and record, but it hasn't been consistent through this year, but it has been probably, I don't know, the last half of this year. I have always had a couple of pre-recorded shows. So yeah, the batching is just something that I do. I just make sure that and once you're ahead, you just stay ahead. That's why it's so amazing. Just get a couple of 2 to 3 pre-recorded shows, and then even if you're just recording once a week, you're already ahead. So it's only if you happen to fall behind because you have a week where you're not feeling well for whatever reason, then take another opportunity to get back ahead another show or two, depending on how far you've fallen behind. But just stay ahead. It's going to save you in the end. It's for you. So other thing I think that I don't know that I've grown in a year, but definitely have learned. Initially, my idea was that I wanted this show to be more kind of not interview based, but have more participants. And I'm not saying it won't go that way in the future, but I've just, in this year, I've learned that trying to get colleagues from your own school is so very challenging because you're all basically working at the same time. So even though I'm not saying I don't want to continue to try to figure that out, I've just in a year kind of let it go for a while, because my goal for this last school year was I want to do more interviews, and I have definitely done more interviews. We had Amy Buchanan at the beginning of the school year. We had Lauren and Nicole. We've had Lisa and Becky. I have, actually tomorrow I will be sitting down with Rachel Lanequist, who is our technology teacher currently, and so I have that going. So I have included more of those interviews, but yeah, I've just found that it's so very difficult with everybody's schedule. Typically what happens is you try to set a date and then it doesn't work, and then you try to find another date. It just becomes very difficult. I'm almost thinking it might be easier to do remote interviews with people, well, even from my school that could work, but also just from, just people I meet in Twitter land and whatever, that actually might be easier. So having some episodes where I will have interviews is still part of the plan. But I kind of had to let it go that was something I wanted to do a lot of, but then I just kind of stumbled across how complicated that was, and I had to let it go that was going to be like a huge part of my show, because it hasn't been a huge part of my show. So I let that go. Okay, something else, or another way that I've grown in this year with my podcast is basically just coming to the point where I'm okay with saying there's no rules in podcasting, because you will see there's a lot of podcast communities, just like for anything, there's a community for everything. So being involved in a couple of podcast communities, sometimes I would get really, worried, stressed out if I'm not doing something the way that it would be advised or suggested in a podcast community. But I just kind of had to get to the point where I'm like, you know what? At the end of the day, I hope this doesn't come off sounding bad, because I don't mean it this way, but at the end of the day, this is my podcast. I'm doing this as a means to share my perspective with others who are interested, just others who are interested. And I'm hoping that my audience knows that this show is not going to be perfect, because I'm also teaching. I'm doing this as I'm teaching. This is not, I don't have the time to do podcasting as my full, it's just not my full-time thing. I'm a teacher. I am a teacher, so that's very time consuming. So I'm doing this with the hope that my audience forgives me when things are not perfect, when maybe my audio isn't the most perfect, when I mix up some different topics, when I, just like last week, I put out an episode, What I Eat to Feel Great, and there is a link to education, and it's because, how you feel impacts how you perform. So of course there's a link. Maybe there's not a direct link, but I don't know, just hope that someone wouldn't say, no, you can't do that, because this is an education podcast and you're talking about what you eat. So, maybe you're failing an expectation. I just hope that people can understand that everything I talk about on this podcast absolutely is linked back to education in some way. But it just, I don't want to start a completely different podcast so I can talk about that one time. So I just feel like at the end of the day I have to be okay with maybe breaking some of those rules, or deciding that maybe there aren't major rules that I have to follow. And I feel like that's easier for me now than in the beginning. I wanted to do everything 100% the way it was maybe explained, or that I read or suggested. And I just can't. So yeah, that's another way that I've grown, is just coming to that place where I say, I just kind of have to, I think, follow this from the best way that I can, and doing what I feel is best for the audience, and also what's best for me, because maybe things could be different if I were to, if the only thing I did were podcasting, then I could really follow some of those rules more, and I would, make sure I had the top equipment and the best this and the best that, and everything that is suggested and recommended, but that's not my reality. So I'm okay with that. That's how I've grown in this year. I'm okay with not really having, feeling confined by those rules. Okay, now, not just have I been podcasting in a year, but I've been teaching and I've been living. So I also wanted to incorporate a little bit of how I've grown in a year as a teacher, because, that's part of the journey. That's, I would say, the biggest part of the journey, because it's where I am. Okay, so I've talked about this. This is not going to be a surprise, but my whole journey with the non-linguistic representation, if you've been listening, I've been doing that as a PLC the last school year. And I cannot speak enough to how I've grown as an educator with this. There wasn't any earth-shattering new discoveries in this PLC, except that I don't know, became more at the forefront, a more conscious effort. I think as an educator to young learners, I've always seen the impact of visuals and the benefit of manipulatives and things like that. But just kind of really learning more about it has forever changed me as an educator. I will never not use what I've learned. This will always continue to be a huge part of what I do in the classroom now. So just a kind of brief in case you haven't been following along, but non-linguistic representation is just anything non-linguistic. It can be used in your teaching. It can also be used in student learning. So just using images to attach meaning to those images. I can give that when I'm doing instructions, giving instructions to my students, when I'm trying to teach a new concept. So lots of visuals, and then using gestures to explain things, but also and gestures and movements so that they also are learning and they can incorporate that as well. We've been using Jolly Phonics this year, so it attaches a motion to a letter and letter sound. So, for example, the letter A, and you kind of like run your fingers across your arm. For ants on a log, there's the song that goes with that. But anyway, they learn the song, they learn the motion that goes with it. And then it's an excellent way to refer back when they're trying to determine the different, I guess, nuances between all of the letters, but specifically the vowels are so tricky for them, especially as being second language learners. Just, I don't know, it's just very difficult. But that was actually, we started using Jolly Phonics before we started the PLC on linguistics, so a lot of this we've been doing, but it's just such I think an impactful way to help them learn. So I've done that, and then lots of sketch noting. Oh my goodness. And shout out to Carrie Bockham, who has her, she's active on Twitter. She's active in on YouTube. She has great videos. I've used a couple of her videos for us to study and learn more about non-linguistic representation. So just like processing of information, sketching your learning, and then according to oh goodness, the name escapes me. But oh my goodness, the name escapes me. Okay, I'll remember it in a minute. But whoever we've been reading, who talked a lot about non-linguistic, but his work basically talks to the importance of like not just using the visuals and not just students using the visuals, but being able to talk about their learning. So that's huge. So students should have time to go back and explain their learning and explain, what did I draw? Oh, and I had to look it up, but it's Marsano's research that I'm referring to. I don't know how that escaped me, but it did. But anyway, yeah, so that's been something that's really been huge, is them using a lot of sketches to represent what they've learned and then having them share in partnerships. I learned a lot about sketchnoting through Carrie Bockham. So she's been very, she just has a lot of information and is very good at using all of that in her class. So a lot of growth there. And then one way, my newest way that I'm incorporating non-linguistic representation is students acting out vocabulary words. So it's very similar to like the letter sounds and whatnot, but it's, to actually look at vocabulary. So right now we're on an animal unit, and I'm teaching, there's lots of new vocabulary words, but they're actually researching habitat, physical characteristics, behavior, and food. So we now have some symbols to go along with that, and I have definitely found that has been so helpful in them remembering some of these terms and understanding how to use them as well. So yeah, that's a way that I've grown as a teacher, and I just think I will never not be using them. I mean, I'm always trying to figure out new ways to use it now. And like I said, I've been using non-linguistic representation all the time. I've used it as a teacher, but never, I think, as consciously and intentionally as I do now after doing this school year of a PLC on it. So yeah. Let's see, how else have I grown? Well, in the last year, so last summer, I started to become I've always had an account on Twitter, but I started to really use it regularly. And I just feel like you guys, if you're not on Twitter, I really, really recommend that you get on Twitter, because you just learn so much. I've learned from other educators, like educators, if they're anywhere in social media, they're on Twitter. So you can definitely learn from them and engage in different chats. And yeah, I'm so grateful for my PLNs on there, because I feel like I've done the most growth with them, because you can seek out your own learning. So you can totally cater the things that you're interested in and what you want to participate in. You don't have to wait for your school to offer you something. You don't have to wait for your grade level to offer you something. You can seek it out, and I think Twitter is a great way to do that. So I've become a regular user on Twitter within the last year, so I've grown that way. And then I would just say, personally, as always, I continue to grow through my podcasts. I listen to a lot of education podcasts, and I get a lot of ideas that way. It's always nice to hear what other teachers are doing, because, I think it's hard to not be boxed into the way that we do things. So you kind of need help to see things differently and just think outside of your own box, because we all get boxed in by your own doings. So yeah, it's just been absolutely nice to just kind of hear other educators, but also then I don't listen just to education, because I'm interested in many different areas. And I think that's the great thing about podcasts. You can consume a lot in a relatively easy manner. So I can be cooking dinner, I can be getting ready for work, I can literally be doing almost anything. So as opposed to, like, let's say if I'm reading, which I do read, and I'll talk about that in a second. When you're reading, that's all you can pretty much do is just read. So I feel like the world of podcasting has opened up the ability to consume so much more information, because of the fact that you can multitask. You can be exercising and consuming a podcast, so it's really great. So yes, I listen to education, but I also listen to a lot of health podcasts, especially regarding the ketogenic diet, which is what I do personally, what I feel is right for me. I have gotten in this past year gotten very interested in listening to a lot of science podcasts, so that's been an area of growth for me. So always listening and learning. I'm just so interested to always learn as much as I can, and really try to maybe like dabble in other areas that maybe I haven't been listening to in the past. So science has been the topic that it's not a topic, it's really an area, because there's so many topics within science, but it's been kind of my new area of podcast listening. And reading. Now, I've always been a reader since I was little. I just, love reading. I did a whole podcast episode on it, but last year I did not meet my reading goal. So I want to make sure that I do meet my reading goal, and I've kept my reading goal pretty low. There's some people who are like, oh, I'm going to read like 60 to 100 books a year. That's great, but I just want to read at least a book a month. That's kind of my goal right now, just because, to read while you have everything else going on. And so that's great and all, except you also need a strategy to make sure it happens. So basically what I do now is set my goal to read about 5% of my book a day. And this comes out to, if I can read 5% of my book a day, which I typically meet, there might be a day or two where I'm just so exhausted and I just want to go to sleep. I can't even keep my eyes open. There's been a few days like that. But basically, if you read 5% of your book a day, then in a month you will have finished your book. This gives you a little bit of room within the month to miss a day or two, and also like on the weekends where I try to read even more, like yesterday I read 10%, so not a whole lot more, but weekends I try to even like get ahead. This strategy of reading 5% of a book a day is getting me to my goal. So I've definitely grown in that way where, it's not that I'm more interested in reading. It's just in this past year, I've come up with a good strategy to actually help me meet my reading goals. So, yeah. So a lot of growth, you guys, but that's pretty much it. A year is here. Those are ways that I've grown and or changed as a podcaster, as a teacher, as a person within the year. I'm sure there's also many other things that I have grown, but those are the main things that I can think of. But I am so excited that I've have a year of my podcast under my belt. It feels really good. It feels like a huge accomplishment. I don't know, maybe to someone who's not podcasting, a year feels like neither here nor there, but to me, I can't tell you how great this feels, especially because I know for a whole year I've been consistent. I've been putting out a new episode every Sunday at 5 o'clock. A new episode comes out. I have been so consistent with that. And, one of the things that I wanted to talk about was the challenge of that, which I kind of mentioned. There have been times where I have felt a little bit just like it's work. It is work. Now I'm not doing, as much editing as I used to. I'm not like I could totally be putting a whole lot more work into this, and it could be even more work, but I spend about 2 to 3 hours a week on my podcasting. I feel like that's good. Part of that is the actual recording time. Part of that is the going back in the playback time. Any editing that I may do, which as you know is very limited now. I've cut back on it. It also includes the typing up of my show notes, the time stamping, putting together my cover art for the week. So that's where the 2 to 3 hours of that come in. But I have had times where I'm like, oh, it kind of feels like, oh, I'm just so tired. Do I really want to do it? So, there have been times where I've thought, gosh, I don't know, am I going to be able to continue doing this for a year? But I think I've gotten into a rhythm now where I know how to make it work, where it's not as much work, and that's why I had to cut back on some of those things so that I can make it work. So there have been challenges and bumps along the road where maybe I'm just not feeling motivated one week, or maybe I feel more stressed out. But yeah, I'm into a really good rhythm where it feels so doable because I had to let myself be okay with less editing, less, maybe not as detailed show notes. So making those changes has helped me to get to the point where I can continue to do this. So yeah, that's basically the challenge that I have experienced. But I don't know, it feels good to have a year done. And if you have been joining me along this year, just wow, thank you. If you haven't been listening the full year, that's okay too. I mean, people discover podcasts at different times. I just appreciate anyone who takes any time to listen to what little old me has to say. So I know that our choices in podcasting are vast and time is of the essence. And I just appreciate anyone who takes any time, even if you're just listening once in a while, as a podcast consumer as well. I know how that goes. So I just appreciate anyone who takes any of their time. So thank you. Thank you for joining me. I am so grateful to my audience. And I just feel so good to have a year of podcasting. It feels really good, which is why I wanted to do this episode, just kind of sharing how maybe I've grown and changed over this year. So that's it, you guys. I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap that up. That got a little bit longer than I really intentioned, but it is what it is. So we are now at the end. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening. I'd love to hear from you. if you have something you want to share about how you've changed in a year, maybe you're a podcaster, maybe you're not a podcaster, maybe how you've just changed and learned and grown as a teacher, as a person, go ahead and tweet to me. I'd love to hear from you guys. You can tweet to me at TammyJ123. That is TAMIJ123. And until next time.
Wait a minute. Wait 1 minute. Before you go, don't forget you can catch our show notes online at www.timetoteach.libsyn. That's libsyn.com. We're also on Facebook at Time to Teach. Don't forget to check out our Facebook group, Teachers for Effective Curriculum. And if you're an educator with your own podcast show, I invite you to join our brand new Facebook group, Teachers Who Podcast. Let's grow a community where we can network, problem solve, and discuss anything and everything podcast related. I'll see you there.